In September 1988, University of Arizona freshman Dianne Abbuhl walked into her dorm to study. At 1:30 a.m. on September 8th, she left the study room and vanished, leaving behind her purse, wallet, car keys, even her ID. 5 weeks later, her skeletal remains were found in a remote desert area northwest of Tucson. Tonight on Unlocked Confidential, we'll reconstruct her final hours, examine key investigative leads, including the mysterious Doug, and probe the unanswered questions that haunt this cold case to this day. It was the evening of September 7, 1988, when 18-year-old freshman Dianne Abbuhl was last seen alive. A promising student at the University of Arizona, Dianne had spent the late evening hours in the women's study lounge of Dodge Dormitory, located on the Tucson campus. Known for her quiet nature and diligence, she was reportedly studying alone, likely preparing for upcoming exams or coursework. The dorm was secure, accessible only to students and staff, and considered a safe space by most on campus. At approximately 1:30 a.m. on September 8th, Dianne left the lounge. Witnesses recall she exited briefly, possibly to use the payphone just outside the building, but after that, she was never seen again. Her wallet, purse, car keys, even her student ID were left untouched in her dorm room. Her vehicle remained parked outside, undisturbed. The next morning, her roommate realized Dianne hadn't returned. Initial concern quickly escalated. Calls went unanswered. No one had seen or heard from her. Alarm spread through her family and friends, and by midday, a missing persons report had been filed with campus and city police. Investigators began examining the dorm and the surrounding areas. No signs of forced entry, no triggered alarms, and no clear surveillance footage. Despite being a locked facility, Dodge Dorm had minimal internal security, and many entry points, like fire exits or upper windows, were poorly monitored. The unsettling implication began to form. Either Dianne had left willingly with someone she trusted, or someone had managed to bypass security and abduct her without detection. Either scenario pointed to a deeply disturbing possibility: the involvement of someone known to the community or very familiar with the dorm layout. The disappearance triggered one of the largest search efforts in the university's history. Police, university staff, and over 1,000 volunteers joined the hunt. Flyers were plastered around Tucson. Helicopters scanned desert perimeters. K-9 units swept campus buildings and drainage tunnels. Despite the massive response, no trace of Dianne emerged. Then came a clue, small but chilling. Several days after her disappearance, a call came in. It directed officers to the Douglas Colonel Apartments, an unoccupied housing complex under construction at the time. Inside, investigators found Dianne's school materials, class notes, handwritten assignments, and folders left behind on a dusty floor. There was no blood, no body, no sign of struggle, but the presence of her belongings in an abandoned site raised urgent questions. Had she been held there? Did she flee? Or was this an attempt to mislead the investigation? The case shifted when another tip came in, this time from someone claiming to have seen Dianne leaving campus with a man named Doug. Multiple witnesses soon echoed the name. They described a young man in his early to mid-20s with sandy or light brown hair, dressed casually. He was reportedly seen walking with Dianne, away from Dodge Dorm and toward the parking lot. Some said she appeared calm, others couldn't say. The name Doug became central to the investigation. But despite composite sketches and media coverage, he was never found. Whether Doug was a student, an outsider, or a false lead remains one of the greatest unknowns of the case. To this day, no one has ever come forward claiming to know who he was, or what really happened in those final minutes after Dianne left the dorm lounge. As the days turned into weeks, the initial momentum behind the investigation began to slow. Despite the early flurry of tips, flyers, and witness interviews, no one matching the description of Doug could be found. Detectives followed up on every variation of the name, Douglas, Doug, even last names or nicknames, but turned up nothing. He wasn't in university enrollment records. He wasn't identified by dorm staff or residence assistants. It was as if he'd never existed, or worse, knew exactly how to stay hidden. One of the more unusual twists in the case came in the form of a psychic tip that reached local authorities. The caller claimed Doug had fled the country, possibly to Canada or Europe. Investigators, under pressure and short on leads, reportedly took the tip seriously enough to forward it to federal agencies, but no evidence ever surfaced to support it. Police continued to appeal to the university community. Flyers were updated. Composite sketches were shared again in dorm lobbies and dining halls. Campus newspapers printed reminders. Yet no new witnesses stepped forward. The description of Doug faded into rumor, an ambiguous figure whose very existence became harder to prove. By the end of the fourth week, with no crime scene, no body, and no confirmed suspect, the investigation stalled. Officially, Dianne's case remained a missing person report. Unofficially, officers feared the worst, and the broader campus community began to move on. Then, on October 13, 1988, 35 days after she disappeared, the case took a grim turn. A pair of hikers exploring a remote canyon trail in the Tucson mountains, part of the Coronado National Forest, stumbled upon what appeared to be human remains partially buried near a wash. The area was rugged, undeveloped, and isolated, accessible only by dirt road and barely visible from air or trail. Forensic teams confirmed the identity. The remains belonged to Dianne Abbuhl. Her death had been brutal. The condition of her body suggested she had been strangled and dumped, likely shortly after her abduction. The bones were found without clothing or shoes, but investigators noted no signs of sexual assault. There were no bullet wounds or blunt force trauma. The location of the dump site raised disturbing possibilities. This wasn't a random place. It required knowledge of terrain, perhaps even scouting. It suggested the killer had either pre-existing familiarity with the area or took deliberate time to ensure the body would not be found quickly. That calculation pointed toward premeditation. Despite renewed media attention, police still had no viable suspect. The discovery deepened the mystery. Dianne had vanished from a secure dorm, appeared nowhere in transit footage, and ended up miles away in a desert canyon. And no one, not even Doug, had been connected to her in any verifiable way. What troubled investigators most was how little forensic evidence they had. The 5-week delay between disappearance and recovery meant that key physical evidence had degraded. No blood samples, no fingerprints, and no fibers were preserved. Any DNA that may have existed on her clothing was likely compromised by sun, wind, and animal exposure. Detectives returned to the original dorm site to reassess. Dianne's personal belongings were still intact in her room. Purse, keys, and student ID, all untouched. It reinforced the theory that she had either intended to return shortly or had been coerced by someone she trusted. No struggle had been reported. No door had been forced. Her departure, while unexplained, appeared peaceful, at least in the eyes of the security system. This led to 2 working theories. One, that Dianne left with someone she willingly followed, possibly Doug, unaware of any danger. Or 2, that someone had entered the dorm without notice, possibly through an unmonitored window or secondary access point, such as a fire exit or unsecured stairwell. Back in 1988, electronic locks and surveillance systems were limited. Once inside, an abductor could have quietly led Dianne away without raising alarms. Police also received several tips about suspicious vehicles near trailheads west of Tucson around the time of her disappearance. One white pickup, another a dark-colored sedan. But none were ever traced to individuals connected with the university, and the leads went cold. The few pieces they had, an unidentified man, a deserted dump site, and a body with no physical evidence, were not enough to file charges. The lack of forensic follow-through by today's standards stands out as a missed opportunity. But who was Doug? That mysterious man became a focal point. Was he a friend, a student, a stranger? Some witnesses described him as calm and polite. Others said he appeared hurried. When police announced a sketch, more anonymous tips came, but all failed to match a known face. In the weeks following, rumors spread of a man using the name Douglas in campus bars and talking about events at the dorm. Nothing was verified. Today, almost 35 years later, Doug remains unidentified. Challenges abound. Campus police files are now archived, memory fades, university dormitories have been renovated. Witness statements from 1988 are unreliable after decades. Technology that could have helped CCTV, cell phone tracking, did not exist. Investigators had to rely on witness memory, basic footprint analysis, and questioning. The lack of concrete evidence and over time loss of clarity have kept this crime unsolved. In 2024, a Medium article and renewed public interest reignited the case. Online investigators revisited campus and desert locations, searched archives, and reviewed suspicious vehicle logs from Coronado Forest entry stations. Some allege DNA from clothing fragments found near the wash may still exist, though untested. Others hope familial DNA from cold case databases may one day provide an answer. The case file is still open, awaiting new tips or technological breakthroughs. We must remember Dianne wasn't just a statistic. She was a freshman excited about life, studying, joining friendships, and beginning new experiences. Her family waited in torment for 35 long days. Her disappearance shook the University of Arizona community, showing how vulnerable students were even within perceived sanctuary. Now, what comes next? Cold case protocols have improved over decades. Digital storage, more thorough processing of DNA, improved interrogation. A review of Dianne's case could benefit from touch DNA analysis on materials recovered but unexamined. Advances in genetic genealogy may identify Doug or related suspects. Finally, a public digital campaign, appealing to alumni from 1988, could yield new names. The vanishing of Dianne Abbuhl represents a deep campus mystery. Abduction from a secured dorm by an unknown man. Over 35 years later, the central mystery of Doug, the circumstances that led her to the desert, and the person who took her remain unsolved. But justice may yet come, through new investigative tools and renewed public demand. If you believe you have information, especially about Doug, desert vehicles, or sightings from 1988, please contact the Pima County Sheriff's Office, case number 88-136703. Your tip could break this cold case once and for all. Thank you for watching Unlocked Confidential. If you found this episode compelling, please like, subscribe, and share. Let the story of Dianne Abbuhl be told, and may it lead to answers that her loved ones deserve.